You were never strong. You were just too scared to fall apart. And no one told you the difference. They called it strength when you didn't cry. They called it maturity when you stayed quiet. They called it leadership when you carried what wasn't yours. They clapped every time you swallowed your truth just to keep the peace. And you believed them, because silence felt safer than rejection. But the truth is, they lied to you. They lied when they told you that being strong meant enduring more. They lied when they praised your ability to function while emotionally bleeding. They lied when they made you the responsible one, the stable one, the one who always keeps it together. Because what they really meant was, you make our lives easier when you ignore your own pain. And now you're tired, not just physically, you're soul tired, spirit tired. Tired of performing strength in a world that never asked how much it cost you. You weren't born to be strong. You were trained to be useful. And, that's not strength. That's programming. Let's go back. Think of your childhood. When did you first realize that expressing emotion made people uncomfortable? When did you start holding it in? Not because you didn't feel, but because you were learning that feeling made you too much. Maybe it was when your parents said, "You're the older sibling, be strong." Maybe it was when your teacher said, "Crying won't solve anything." Maybe it was when your friends pulled away the day you were honest. It doesn't matter when. What matters is you internalized a script that says don't make it about you, be reliable, stay calm, be the bigger person, put others first. You became strong, which meant invisible, composed, emotionally quiet, always available, never needy. But what they called strength was actually compliance. They conditioned you to believe that pain must be endured silently, that asking for help is weakness, that rest is laziness, that boundaries are selfish. That struggle is noble. And so you became the strong one, at home, at work, in relationships, in your friend group. They came to you when they were breaking. But where did you go? Nowhere. Because you were the strong one. You were the one who always figured it out, the one who kept smiling, the one who didn't need help, the one who everyone leaned on, even when you were falling apart inside. And the worst part, you started believing it. You started measuring your worth by your capacity to endure. You stopped asking for support. You stopped expecting to be understood. You just kept holding everything because someone had to. That's not strength. That's emotional isolation. And that's why you're tired. Not from life, but from holding the performance together. You're tired because you never stop scanning for everyone else's needs. Tired because you don't know how to let go. Tired because even when you rest, you're still carrying the emotional weight of being the strong one. But here's what no one tells you. Strength, when disconnected from truth, becomes a cage. You didn't choose strength. It was assigned to you, expected of you, rewarded in you. And now you don't know who you are without it. You fear softness. You mistrust peace. You reject ease. Because somewhere deep down you believe, if I stop being strong, no one will stay. That belief? That's the real exhaustion. So let's start here. You're not weak for wanting to rest. You're not broken for feeling numb. You're not lazy for wanting help. You're not failing for needing space. You're just finally reaching the threshold of your false self. And it hurts. But it's also holy, because collapse isn't the end. It's the invitation. The moment when your soul says, I'm done performing. I want to be real now. And being real means allowing the parts of you that were silenced in the name of strength to finally speak. That's what this video is about. It's not motivation. It's not a speech about pushing through. It's not a guide to being stronger. It's a ritual, a quiet return to the parts of you that were buried under applause, to the voice you abandoned just to be respected, to the identity that existed before they trained you to carry it all. Because you were never meant to survive by being strong. You were meant to be free. And freedom isn't loud. It starts in silence, in the soft choice to say, I'm done performing. I'm done proving. I'm done pretending this isn't killing me. So if you're here, if you're tired, if you're scared to stop holding it together, know this, you're not alone, you're not weak, you're not lost. You're remembering. Let's begin. They didn't ask you to be strong. They trained you to be. It wasn't a compliment, it was conditioning. And it started so early you didn't even notice it was happening. It came in quiet rewards, in subtle nods, in the way they clapped when you didn't cry or called you mature when you stayed silent. They praised your ability to hold it all in. Not because it was healthy, but because it made you easier to manage. That's how the system works. It doesn't need you to be happy. It just needs you to be functional. So it installs a script, line by line, scene by scene, until your identity becomes a performance. And strength? Strength became the costume. You were taught that being the strong one was noble, that being the helper, the healer, the holder of everything was a badge of honor. But no one ever told you that the badge came with a contract that said, you don't get to ask for help, you don't get to fall apart, you don't get to be the one who needs, you don't get to stop, because if you stop, everything might collapse, because if you rest, someone might be disappointed, because if you say no, someone might leave. That's not empowerment, that's emotional captivity. And the worst part, they convinced you it was love. Think back, when you did too much, they called you reliable. When you stayed in the relationship too long, they called you loyal. When you said yes to things that drained you, they called you selfless. When you never spoke your needs, they called you easygoing. They gave you a trophy for self-abandonment, and you held it like it meant something, because at the time you didn't know that applause can be a prison. This wasn't accidental. The system benefits from your performance. Because strong people don't complain, strong people don't rebel, strong people don't demand more. Strong people keep the machine running. That's why you were rewarded, not for being well, but for being silent. They didn't care if you were whole. They only cared if you were useful. And every time you ignored yourself to serve others, they made you feel proud. That's how deep the programming goes. Even now, when you try to slow down, your nervous system panics, because it was conditioned to equate stillness with danger. You don't feel safe doing nothing. You don't feel safe asking for help. You don't feel safe saying, I can't, not because you're weak, but because your entire self-worth was tied to how well you held everyone else. And even now, you confuse rest with laziness, boundaries with selfishness, softness with failure. That's not your truth, that's the script they gave you. And it's why you're tired, not just in your body, but in your identity. Because carrying that script every day requires energy you no longer have. You're tired of being the one who fixes it all. Tired of being the one who always knows what to say. Tired of being the one who holds space while no one holds yours. Tired of being admired for strength that was actually suppression. But you keep going, because it's what you were trained to do. Push through, smile, serve, hold. Even when your back breaks, even when your voice trembles, even when you want to scream, what about me? That's the real lie. That strength is noble, but only when it's selfless. That you can carry the world as long as you don't ask to be carried. That you can hold everyone just as long as you don't drop the mask. That your exhaustion is weakness, when it's actually truth knocking at the door. And now, you're ready to answer. Because the fatigue isn't physical, it's spiritual. It's the weight of living in contradiction, of being the strong one who's dying inside, of being praised for your performance while your soul starves for softness. And you're done, not because you can't keep going, but because you finally know you shouldn't have to. There's a moment where the body stops asking, stops negotiating, stops cooperating, it stops pretending you're fine, and starts collapsing, slowly, quietly, completely, not as punishment, as protection. Because when your mind refuses to break the script, your body breaks the cycle. Case 1. Anna, 38. Everyone said she was unstoppable. Corporate VP, 2 kids. The friend who always showed up. The daughter who never disappointed. She ran on caffeine and compliance. Smiled in meetings. Held space for her partner. Texted I'm fine while crying in her car. Until one day, she woke up and couldn't move her hands. Doctors ran tests. Nothing conclusive. They called it stress. Suggested meditation and medication. But what really happened? Her body finally said, if you won't stop, I will. And in that stillness, she met herself for the first time in years. Case 2. Elijah, 41. The man everyone respected. Built his business from nothing, provided for his family. Never missed a deadline, never said no, until the panic attacks started, then the insomnia, then the numbness, then the day he sat in his car for 40 minutes, unable to remember how to start the engine. The diagnosis? Burnout. But what no one explained was this. He wasn't burned out from failure. He was burned out from faking strength every day, from carrying everyone, from never being allowed to fall apart. These aren't stories of weakness. These are stories of awakening. Because collapse doesn't mean you're broken. Collapse means your soul is refusing to betray itself any longer. The mask got too heavy. The applause got too quiet. The expectations got too loud. So your system, your body, mind, spirit, triggered a shutdown. And in that shutdown, you found a crack in the performance. And through that crack, you finally started asking, why am I like this? Who told me I had to be everything? What happens if I stop? And that's the beginning, not of weakness, but of remembrance. Because real strength isn't the ability to hold everything. It's the willingness to stop pretending you can. It's sitting in the mess without fixing it. It's admitting you're tired without apologizing. It's crying in front of people who expected you to lead. It's whispering, I don't want to do this anymore, and meaning it. That's not collapse. That's clarity. The moment the old version of you begins to die, the one who thought being strong meant being silent, the one who believed love must be earned through endurance, the one who confused burnout with purpose. And here's what's wild. Most people don't even realize they're in survival mode until their body refuses to cooperate. They've functioned for so long under pressure that they mistake exhaustion for personality. They say things like, I've always been this way. I just don't have energy anymore. I guess I'm just getting older. But deep down, something whispers, no, this isn't age. This is overuse. Overuse of your voice, of your patience, of your nervous system, of your ability to fake okay. And now the truth is surfacing through fatigue. So if your body is slowing down, if your mind is foggy, if your chest feels tight, if your joy is flickering out, you're not failing. You're awakening. You're reaching the end of the performance. The version of you that carried it all is dissolving, not to be punished, but to make space. Space for rest, space for truth, space for reconstruction. And yes, it's terrifying, because your identity was built around holding it together, and now you're learning how to let it fall apart. But what comes next isn't collapse, it's rebirth. When the mask finally falls, there's a terrifying silence. You're no longer performing, you're no longer faking strength, you're no longer carrying things just to be called resilient. But now what? Who are you without the weight? This is the sacred gap, the space between the collapse and the construction, the stillness between performance and embodiment. It feels empty, but it's not. It's pregnant with truth, because now, for the first time in years, you're not responding to expectation, you're responding to yourself. And here's the truth they never taught you. Your identity isn't found, it's remembered. You were never meant to build your life on exhaustion. You were meant to build it on rhythm, on clarity, on congruence. But the system taught you to survive, not to know yourself. So now, you begin. Again. But this time, no more self-sacrifice in the name of approval. No more yes when your chest says no. No more loyalty to roles you've outgrown. Now you build from the inside out. And that begins with removing what was never you. You start small. You stop apologizing for resting. You stop defending your softness. You stop giving access to people who only knew the performing version of you. And you begin asking, what pace feels like peace? What conversations drain me instantly? What does my body say when I stop pretending? Who do I become when I'm not being strong? And slowly you rebuild a new architecture, one that doesn't need applause, one that doesn't need pressure, one that allows you to be fully human without performing strength as currency. This is not easy, it's not glamorous, it won't go viral, it's quiet, it's awkward, it's sacred. You will disappoint people, you will confuse others, you will lose connections with those who only loved your mask. But in the ashes of that version of you, something softer starts to breathe. A self that doesn't hold everything, a self that doesn't flinch at stillness, a self that walks slower but arrives fully. That's not weakness, that's wisdom. Let's be clear, you were never meant to be the one who handles it all. You were meant to be whole, and wholeness includes rest mess, confusion, silence, boundaries, depth space. You were conditioned to believe those things were inconvenient, but in truth, they are structure. They're what keep you aligned, not the to-do list, not the performance, not the applause, but the invisible rhythm behind your choices. The moment you say, I don't do that anymore, I don't carry that for others. I don't betray myself to be liked. That's the new framework. This version of you, it doesn't grind, they glide. They wake up and check their energy, not just their calendar. They build their work around their nervous system, not the other way around. They choose presence over productivity. They honor rest as strategy, not escape. That's not laziness, that's evolution. Because when you stop being strong for everyone else, you start becoming true to yourself. And the world will feel that shift, not through your words, but through your presence. You'll walk into rooms differently, you'll hold space differently, you'll be quieter, but heavier, not in burden, in clarity. This is the beginning of real structure, one built on truth, not tension, one that holds your softness without punishment, one that bends with your breath, not with other people's urgency. From here, your life will look different, your relationships, your decisions, your rhythm, because you're no longer choosing based on what makes others comfortable. You're choosing based on what keeps you connected. That's the real rebuild, and yes, it's slow, but this time, you're not building for applause. You're building for alignment, and that changes everything. The moment you stop performing. Strength. A question echoes in your silence. How do I live from this place now? Because without the script, you need structure, but not the old kind. Not one built on urgency, guilt, or expectation. You need a new architecture, one rooted in alignment, not applause. You've spent years waking up to meet a role. Now it's time to wake up to meet yourself. Let's start with your routine. Your first hour each day used to be a scramble, checking messages, responding to needs, rushing into productivity. But now you understand. Your first hour sets the frequency. You don't just own your time, you design it. That means no screen before silence, no to-do list before breath work, no external voices before you remember your own. This is not a routine for performance. It's a rhythm for remembrance. You're not trying to get ahead. You're anchoring into who you are. Then comes your decision-making. You used to say yes because it made you needed. You stayed available because it made you useful. You accepted every role because it validated your existence. Now, you ask different questions. Does this honor my nervous system? Is this a real yes or a guilt response? Will I feel resentment after this? Is this a repetition of the old script or a declaration of the new me? This is where you begin filtering reality through truth, not training. And when truth guides your decisions, you stop leaking energy. You stop regretting yeses. You stop collapsing after overextending. You start living with space inside your soul. Next, your relationships. They need to be recalibrated, because when you stop performing strength, you'll stop tolerating shallow connections. You'll crave presence, silence, depth. You'll need people who don't panic when you pause, people who can sit with your uncertainty without needing to fix it. And here's what happens. Some people will fade. They loved your mask, not your truth. Let them. Others will surprise you. They were waiting for your depth to make space for theirs. This isn't about isolation, it's about integration. You're no longer available for relationships that require your exhaustion as a form of currency. You're now aligned with people who trade in honesty, pace, and reciprocity. Then comes your work. This is where the shift gets real, because your old output was tied to proving. You worked to be seen. You created to be needed. You stayed busy to avoid stillness. But now, you work from wholeness. And that means saying no to urgency-based projects, creating from rest, not from pressure, aligning your income with your rhythm, not your trauma, refusing to trade your energy for validation. You're not lazy, you're precise. You're not slow, you're sovereign. Because productivity disconnected from alignment is just another form of self-abandonment. Finally, your presence. This is where the new structure lives in your body. You don't rush into rooms anymore. You enter with calm, with gravity, with clarity. You don't overshare to prove vulnerability. You reveal what resonates and hold the rest with powerful silence. You don't apologize for your boundaries. You install them without announcement, because now you're no longer trying to be strong. You're being real. And realness, when rooted in rhythm, creates authority without explanation. You become someone who doesn't seek permission. You move as someone who already belongs. That's the new structure. It's not built in a day, but it is built deliberately. Each decision, each silence, each restructured habit, each no that used to be a people-pleasing yes. Every small act of congruence is a beam in the architecture of your new self. And that architecture, it doesn't look like success to everyone. But to your nervous system, it feels like coming home. Let's keep going. Even after you rebuild, even after you breathe deeper, even after you restructure your days around alignment instead of obligation, there's a whisper that returns. This is selfish. You're letting people down. You used to do more. They need you. And just like that, the weight tries to crawl back onto your shoulders, not because you failed, but because your conditioning doesn't vanish. It fights. It bargains. It disguises itself as duty. This is the confrontation no one warns you about. You set a boundary and feel guilty for days. You say no and hear your parents' voices echoing disapproval in your mind. You rest and your chest tightens with the phantom. Shame of not being productive. You're not weak, you're not broken. You're meeting the ghost of your old script. And that ghost doesn't want to leave quietly. Your mind was trained for decades. It doesn't understand this new rhythm yet. It equated overextension with love. It linked self-denial with safety. It mistook burnout for responsibility. So now, as you break those patterns, you feel resistance. Not because you're wrong, but because you're finally right. But right feels unfamiliar. And unfamiliar often feels unsafe. That's the trap. You're not tired because you're doing less. You're tired because you're carrying emotional dissonance. You're trying to live free, with a mind built for captivity. Let's make that clear. You weren't just conditioned to be strong. You were conditioned to be afraid of softness. They told you softness was weakness, that boundaries were rejection, that rest meant you didn't care, that saying, "I can't," was failure. So when you start choosing softness, your system panics. Not because softness is wrong, but because it threatens the structure that used to keep you accepted. You'll hear things like, "You've changed. You're distant. You used to always say yes. What's going on with you?" That's the world reacting to your recalibration. And your job isn't to defend it. Your job is to stay aligned anyway. You have to learn how to sit in the discomfort of being misunderstood. You have to let people be disappointed. You have to let expectations collapse. You have to grieve the old version of you that everyone depended on, because the version of you that's emerging doesn't owe anyone an explanation. You're not cold. You're not selfish. You're not distant. You're rooted. And rooted people don't flinch when the storm starts. They breathe, they pause, they listen to themselves louder than they listen to pressure. Still, the voice will return. That internal voice trained by survival. It'll say, "Just this once. Don't make it a big deal. They're going through a lot. Be strong, just a little longer. And sometimes you'll fold, sometimes you'll say yes, sometimes you'll go back into the role. That's okay, because growth isn't perfection. It's awareness. Every time you return to the role, you feel the weight more sharply. Not because it grew heavier, but because you've grown lighter. Your body now knows the difference between carrying from guilt and giving from overflow, between being useful and being yourself. So, here's what you practice. When guilt whispers, ask, "Who taught me this?" When fear rises, remind, "My alignment is not a threat." When shame surfaces, breathe, "I'm allowed to honor myself." This is how you rewire your response, not with force, but with presence, with truth, with repetition. You repeat it until it becomes your new baseline, and one day it clicks. You say no and don't flinch. You rest and feel proud. You choose yourself and feel peace, not because the system changed, but because you stopped obeying it. That's the quiet liberation. That's the moment you realize you don't have to be strong. You just have to be true. Let's keep building. Strength was never the goal. Not the kind they taught you. Not the kind that requires silence, obedience, exhaustion. That wasn't strength, that was survival. And now, you're redefining it. Because what if real strength isn't in how much you carry, but in what you no longer tolerate? What if strength is refusing to hold what breaks you? Let's talk about presence. You used to believe your value came from doing, from producing, from being everywhere, for everyone, all the time. You were always on, always solving, always anticipating, always ready to jump in. But that version of strength was killing you, because constant presence for others meant constant absence from yourself. You were available to everyone, except the parts of you that needed your own attention. And now you're learning the power of quiet, presence, the kind that doesn't fill the room but recalibrates it, the kind that doesn't perform but anchors. This kind of strength moves slowly, speaks deliberately, refuses to rush. It doesn't prove, it doesn't rescue, it doesn't apologize. It simply exists with gravity. That's the new you, the one who walks in a room and doesn't try to control it, the one who holds their own rhythm even when everyone's spinning. Because now you understand, being grounded is louder than being loud. And when you're fully present, rooted in your own center, you radiate clarity. And clarity is magnetic. People will start to feel it. They'll listen differently when you speak. They'll pause when you enter. They'll notice your silence has weight, not because you're trying to dominate, but because you're finally aligned. You no longer leak energy through over-explaining. You no longer chase validation with over-performance. You no longer fill silence out of discomfort. You sit in it. You breathe in it. You own it. Because silence, when rooted in self-trust, becomes power. And here's the irony. The more you do less, the more people feel you. Because now your energy isn't diluted. It's precise, it's potent, it's intentional. You don't have to scream to be heard. You don't have to hustle to be valuable. You don't have to bleed to be needed. You just show up as you. And that is enough. Because that version of you doesn't serve to survive. They serve to create. They don't perform strength. They embody peace. This is where your tiredness shifts. It doesn't disappear, it transforms. Your exhaustion was never about work. It was about disconnection, about overextension, about leaking energy into scripts that weren't yours. Now, as you reclaim your rhythm, you reclaim your energy. And that energy, it becomes clarity, it becomes presence, it becomes power. Not the power to dominate, but the power to stay aligned when everything around you is pulling. So when you feel tired now, pause. Ask, is this physical? Or is this a signal that I've stepped out of alignment again? Because your body speaks, and your energy never lies. You don't need another motivational speech. You don't need to push harder. You don't need to be stronger. You need to listen. And when you listen, you remember strength was never about carrying everything. It was about knowing what to carry, what to release, and when to be still. Let's keep going. There comes a moment in your evolution when something inside you quietly shifts, and you no longer explain yourself, not out of arrogance, not out of rebellion, but because you finally remembered. You don't owe your peace an apology. You don't need to justify your boundaries. You don't need to explain your silence. You don't need to translate your clarity into palatable language. You simply exist, and your energy begins to speak for you. This is the beginning of silent authority. You don't raise your voice, you lower your tolerance. You don't beg for space, you become the room. You don't fight for respect, you embody alignment and people respond accordingly. And the most powerful part? You stop needing people to understand. You realize, if they can't feel your frequency, they're not meant to walk with you at this stage. And that's okay, let's be honest, you used to over-explain everything. Why you needed rest, why you weren't available, why you changed your mind, why you were shifting your energy. You performed justification because you were still negotiating your worth. Now, you've stopped performing. You've stopped negotiating. You've stopped softening your truth so others feel less insecure. You don't explain alignment. You live it. And those meant to understand will feel it. Not through your words, but through your presence. People will notice. They'll say, you're different. You're so calm lately. Something about you feels grounded. They won't be able to name it, but they'll feel it. Because you've stopped leaking energy through overcommitment, overgiving, and overcompensating. You've shifted from chaos to coherence, from hustle to harmony, from visibility to vibration. Now you're not trying to be seen, you're trying to be true. And truth is always felt, even when it's unspoken. You walk into rooms with less volume but more gravity. People pause, not because you're loud, but because you've become a mirror. You reflect clarity, you reflect boundaries, you reflect what others forgot they were allowed to become. And in doing so, you invite people to meet themselves again, just by being you. That's leadership, not the kind with titles and noise, the kind that moves energy without effort. But here's the sacred tension. As your clarity increases, so will the distance between you and the version of you that once needed to be liked. You'll start saying no faster. You'll stop replying to what drains you. You'll exit conversations that pull you back into noise. And it will feel strange at first. You'll wonder, am I isolating? Am I becoming cold? No, you're becoming clear. You're no longer available for anything that doesn't honor your frequency. Not out of pride, but out of precision. This version of you, you don't explain your healing, you don't defend your pace, you don't negotiate your vision. You've reclaimed your time, recalibrated your relationships, rewritten your inner dialogue. You're not just strong anymore. You're sovereign. You're no longer just surviving. You're building from rhythm, from rest, from remembrance. And people feel that, not through what you say, but through how you hold space. Let this be your new language. Clarity without confrontation, boundaries without bitterness, stillness without shame, strength without struggle. You're not less emotional, you're more anchored. You're not less caring, you're more conscious of where your care flows. You're not less generous, you're more discerning with what you give. Because your energy is no longer a currency for approval. It's a signal, and not everyone has the frequency to receive it. Let's continue. Now that you've reclaimed your rhythm, shed the mask, and stopped negotiating your truth, the real question becomes, how do you live from here? Because clarity without action becomes pressure, and alignment without structure becomes fantasy. You're no longer living to survive. Now you must live to sustain, and that means building your life from the inside out. This new you, they don't operate from urgency. They don't answer every call. They don't jump into every opportunity. They pause. They listen. They ask deeper questions, like, does this choice honor my nervous system? Is this commitment rooted in guilt or clarity? Will this version of me still want this in 6 months? That's not hesitation. That's discernment. And discernment isn't slow. It's accurate. You no longer chase momentum. You cultivate it through aligned decisions. Let's start with your environment. You clean the space, not for aesthetics but for energetic coherence. You remove things that no longer represent who you're becoming. You rearrange your room, your calendar, your digital spaces to match your internal architecture. Because environment is a mirror. You no longer tolerate clutter, physical or emotional. You no longer keep connections just in case. You no longer operate in noise. You choose intentional simplicity as a power move. Because stillness doesn't make you lazy, it makes you focused. Then you move into your rhythm. You stop measuring success by output. You stop glorifying exhaustion. You stop using busyness as identity. Instead, you ask, what does my energy want today? What would it look like to move with grace, not grind? You begin aligning your actions with seasons. You allow winter. You allow pause. You allow restoration. And from that stillness, you birth things that actually resonate. Not because they're trending, but because they're true. Now your work. You don't just want to make money, you want to make meaning. You want your work to reflect your frequency. So you begin to filter everything through a new lens. Does this project pull me closer to who I'm becoming? Is this collaboration an energetic match, or a strategy based in fear? Can I scale this without selling my rhythm? That's the new model. You no longer trade your aliveness for visibility. You don't chase relevance. You anchor in value. And when value is embodied, opportunities chase you. Your relationships shift too. You no longer show up just because it's expected. You show up fully or not at all. You stop explaining your pauses. You stop apologizing for boundaries. You stop initiating where there's no reciprocity. This isn't isolation. This is energetic curation. You realize that not everyone deserves your presence, especially if they only loved you when you were performing. And the ones who align with your truth, they rise to meet you. They love. The version of you that doesn't hustle for approval. Even the way you rest changes. You no longer rest as escape. You rest as strategy. You rest as a declaration that says, I don't need to burn out to prove my value. I don't need to collapse to deserve pause. I am allowed to hold stillness as sacred. You go to bed without guilt. You take days off without explanation. You structure your calendar around energy, not urgency. Because now, you finally understand that sustainability isn't about slowing down. It's about honoring your rhythm without apology. And from this rhythm you begin to create. Not from pressure, not from comparison, but from overflow. You write, speak, serve, build from a place of quiet conviction. No more performing, no more pandering, no more shrinking your truth to be more palatable. You show up as a mirror and a signal. A mirror for those who forgot themselves. A signal for those searching for resonance. And everything you build from here carries that signature. This is the new reality. Your time is sacred. Your space is intentional. Your energy is curated. Your pace is self-honoring. Your work is aligned. Your relationships are reciprocal. And this isn't a phase. It's not a mood. It's a standard. And once that standard is installed, everything else adjusts. You no longer bend to fit the world. You become the blueprint. Let's move forward. There's no ceremony, no grand exit, no applause when it happens. The day the old version of you dies is quiet. It happens mid-step, mid-sentence, mid-thought. You suddenly realize, I can't keep being this person anymore, the strong one, the one who carries, the one who smiles, the one who fixes, the one who never complains. It wasn't you, it was your armor. And now, the armor doesn't fit. Not because you're weak, but because you've finally remembered your real shape. This is the moment of reckoning, the emotional funeral, where you bury a version of yourself you thought was required for love, respect, survival. You sit with the memories, the overgiving, the overperforming, the nights you held it all in, the days you collapsed and still showed up. And for a moment, you grieve. Not because that version was fake, but because it carried you farther than it should have. It protected you, but it also hid you, and now you don't need it anymore. You don't need to be the one who always knows what to say. You don't need to be the first to respond. You don't need to be the peacekeeper, the hero, the glue. You're allowed to be human, messy, uncertain, imperfect. You're allowed to cry mid-conversation, to pause mid-project, to walk away mid-sentence. Not as failure, but as freedom. Because now you no longer see softness as weakness. You see it as access. Access to yourself, to others, to the truth. That's the climax. When the old you, the strong one, the quiet one, the dependable one, tries to rise again, but you don't answer. You don't pick up the weight. You don't fold into the role. You don't reach for the mask. You sit in your skin, raw but real, tender but true, unapologetically whole, and in that moment you reclaim something sacred, your presence, not your personality, not your performance, not your potential, your presence, your breath, your rhythm, your being. You stop seeking closure, you stop waiting for permission, you stop explaining your evolution. You simply are, and people feel it, the shift in your eyes, the gravity in your voice, the pause in your presence. They sense you're no longer running, no longer begging, no longer bending to be palatable. You've exited the contract, the silent one that said, be strong or be alone, be helpful or be rejected, be perfect or be punished. You ripped it up, burned it, buried it, and in its place, you wrote a new vow. I will be whole, even if no one understands. That's when your tiredness begins to vanish, not because you slept more, but because you stopped fighting yourself. You're no longer at war with your softness, your boundaries, your sensitivity, your need for space. You stop betraying yourself in the name of fitting in, and that peace, that rest, it's not just physical, it's spiritual restoration. It's the moment your soul feels safe in your body again. From here on, you build from clarity. You speak only when it's true. You give only when it's clean. You say yes only when it's whole. You're not the strong one anymore. You're the real one. And realness? It's unshakable. Because it's not powered by performance, and it's powered by presence. You walk differently now, not with pride, but with peace. You look people in the eye and don't flinch. You enter rooms and don't shrink. You hold space without absorbing pain. You're no longer seeking safety, you've become it. And those who resonate with that, they find you. Not because you marketed yourself well, but because alignment has a frequency, and you're finally vibrating at yours. Let's go further. Your body is not a machine. It's not here to perform, to grind, to obey every calendar alert. Your body is a temple, a place of rhythm, a living sanctuary. And for years you treated it like a battlefield. You ignored its warnings, you silenced its signals, you pushed it past clarity, then called it discipline. But now, you're starting to listen. And what it's saying is this: I never needed you to be strong. I needed you to be honest. Your breath was never meant to be shallow. Your shoulders weren't meant to live tense. Your chest wasn't designed to hold panic like furniture. Your stomach wasn't made to twist with guilt. These weren't personality traits. They were responses to distortion, signs that your body was caught between duty and truth, between expectation and embodiment. But now that you've remembered who you are, your body becomes your ally again. It's no longer just your tool. It's your compass. It tells you where you belong, who to trust, what to release. It doesn't speak in words. It speaks in signals. And you're finally fluent. So now you design your life around it. Not around time, but energy. Not around pressure, but peace. You let your mornings breathe. You treat sleep like a ritual. You nourish without shame. You pause without apology. And in doing so, you restore your baseline of safety. You no longer need to escape your body. Your home. That's what they never taught you. That strength isn't in endurance, it's in receptivity, in listening, in slowing down, in honoring what rises. And from that stillness, a new rhythm emerges. You don't rush into spaces, you arrive. You don't respond instantly, you reflect. You don't overfill your days, you design them around breath. This rhythm, it protects you, because when you're in rhythm, you're in power. And when you're in power, you stop being available to dysfunction. You recognize noise instantly. You sense manipulation without proof. You feel dissonance before words are even spoken, not because you're hypervigilant, but because your peace is now precision. And this brings us to something most don't understand. Your absence is now a strategy. You don't explain why you left. You don't announce your silence. You don't justify your withdrawal. You just exit what no longer resonates. Quietly, fully, without residue, because your presence is no longer an obligation. It's a sacred currency, and not everyone gets access. That's not arrogance, it's integrity. You no longer perform connection. You embody energetic boundaries. This new version of you doesn't hustle for proximity, doesn't beg to be seen, doesn't compete for space. You've become space. Still, whole, sufficient. You're no longer loud, because your peace is louder than noise. You're no longer everywhere, because your alignment needs focus, not fragments. You're no longer accessible, because your frequency demands discernment. You show up where you're received, not just where you're recognized. And that changes everything. Now people feel you differently. They pause, they soften, they listen closer. Not because you're trying to impress, but because your rhythm makes them remember their own. You've become a mirror, a recalibration, a quiet permission to live differently, not because you speak loudly, but because you live clearly. And clarity is contagious. So here's the truth. You were never tired because you were too weak. You were tired because you were too disconnected from your rhythm, from your body, from your truth. Now that you're home again, rest becomes your rhythm, silence becomes your boundary, presence becomes your strategy. You don't need to announce your evolution. You embody it. You don't need to prove your worth. You protect it. And that's the kind of strength no one can touch. You don't finish this journey with a trophy. There's no parade, no viral quote, no spotlight, only a stillness, one that doesn't demand anything from you, because it knows you've already returned, not to the world, not to a role, but to yourself. This stillness doesn't ask you to be strong. It invites you to be real, to be soft, to be slow, to be full. And in that fullness, you remember something that was buried beneath decades of performance. You were never meant to survive by carrying everything. You were meant to live by being whole. From this moment forward, everything becomes different. Your silence has weight, your rhythm has authority, your breath becomes sacred, and you start noticing things. You notice the shift in how people talk to you. You notice which rooms drain you. You notice how loud the world is when you no longer need its noise. You don't react. You choose. You don't rush. You anchor. You don't adapt to be accepted. You stay true and let the world rearrange around you. That's presence. That's peace. That's power. But here's the real gift. You become a living permission slip. Your life, your alignment, starts awakening something in others. Not through advice. Not through performance. Just through how you hold yourself. People begin to say things like, "You make me feel safe to slow down. I didn't know peace could look like that. I don't know what it is, but I want to live like you do." And it's not because you're special, it's because you remembered. And in doing so, you remind them. You become the mirror for the versions of themselves they abandoned, not by teaching, by embodying, not by shouting, by walking differently. That's your legacy now. Not a brand, not a title, not a niche, but a vibration, a presence, a rhythm, a frequency that says, it's safe to stop performing. You don't have to carry everything anymore. You're not strong, you're sacred. You're not tired, you're misaligned. You're not lazy, you're overused. You're not too much, you're finally full. And fullness? It's what the world actually needs most. So now I ask you, don't keep this moment to yourself. Share this video with someone you love, someone who's always tired, someone who's been strong for too long, someone who holds the world together but cries when no one is watching. They deserve to hear this. Comment below. What mask are you ready to bury today? What weight are you finally willing to set down? Your words might give someone else the courage to stop pretending. Like this video, if it touched you in a place deeper than logic, that tells the platform this isn't just content. It's a signal. Subscribe if you're ready to walk this new rhythm with us. No pressure, just truth, just presence, just reminders of who you were before the performance began. We're not building a community here. We're remembering one. A global family of souls who are no longer interested in being strong. We're here to be whole. You made it to the end. That alone is proof you're not tired because you're broken. You're tired because your old self is dissolving. And now it's your time to live. Fully, slowly, clearly, quietly. Let the world watch as you become a new kind of strong. One that doesn't carry everything. Because it doesn't have to anymore. Let's walk.